a surface level, all you see is what social media is presenting to you first, and that is a bunch of white people shopping from Reformation, which obviously isn't inclusive. Hello and welcome to this video. If you aren't subscribed to me, which you probably aren't because I have 10 subscribers, thank you to the 10 of you. I'm Cebo, Mtshemla, I eat plants and I like my fashion slow, so if you're into that stuff or into me, I hope you stick around. You may have clicked on this video because you want to learn more about sustainable fashion, or you may have clicked on it knowing quite a lot about sustainable fashion but just don't know how to talk about it, which is something I struggled with for a long time and still do. Some of you though may be sitting here wondering why someone would be able to tell you how to talk about something, because if you're passionate about it or interested about it, you should talk about it how you want. But I'm making this video for two reasons. Through learning and talking about sustainable fashion, I've learned two things. One, the sustainability movement, whether it be veganism or sustainable fashion, it's just not very inclusive and centers white people and white creators a hell of a lot. And the second thing is, when talking about sustainability, people aren't always receptive. I wasn't receptive as well when I was learning about this stuff or heard people talk about it. You need to find ways to talk about these things that help people understand why it's important for them to make sustainable choices. Sustainability on a surface level, because of how whitewashed it is, it looks expensive, it looks inaccessible, but we should explore and talk about ways that everyone can participate in these movements. So firstly, I think it's important that I touch on some of my personal experiences when it comes to talking about sustainable living. I enjoy creating content and sharing the stuff I learn about sustainable fashion and teaching other people, and I have been met with really nice messages from people saying they appreciate me sharing this stuff because they've learned a lot from me, which is so cool. But I'm also met with a lot of angry DMs, people not being very receptive to the content, and I do appreciate DMs and appreciate going back and forth with people because I still have a hell of a lot to learn. I'm not perfect, I can learn from people too, and my perspective on things is constantly changing and evolving, which I appreciate, and that happens through being challenged. But a lot of the time it is just people not understanding what sustainable fashion is all about, and I honestly don't blame them. So to understand how to talk about sustainability, whether it be veganism, sustainable fashion or anything else, it's important to understand what these movements can do better, and that is be more inclusive. So when it comes to sustainable fashion, on a surface level, it doesn't include low-income groups, it doesn't include plus-size people, it doesn't include people of color. The fact that we have to dig deep to find those creators or even have such conversations is a problem in itself. If you don't know a lot about sustainable fashion, on a surface level, all you see is what social media is presenting to you first, and that is a bunch of white people shopping from Reformation, which obviously isn't inclusive. That's why people have a lot of questions, and that's totally fair. So if sustainable fashion isn't shopping from Reformation or all these sustainable brands, what is sustainable fashion? So the reason sustainable fashion is so important is because it holds the fast fashion industry accountable. The reason we need to hold the fast fashion industry accountable is because it hurts people and the planet. It exploits people, more specifically women of color, puts them in danger. And one example of this is what happened at Rama Plaza. More than 1,000 people died and many more were injured. So listen to my language here. I'm not saying choosing sustainable fashion because people are going to think I'm telling you to shop at sustainable brands, which is not what I'm telling you to do. Making more sustainable fashion choices can mean consuming less, altering the clothes you already have, mending them, thrifting clothes and flipping them to your style. Making sustainable fashion choices means lots of things. It doesn't mean shopping from sustainable brands. It means whatever it means to you. So buying expensive clothes from brands like Reformation isn't the only way to participate in sustainable fashion. And in fact, even if you're choosing sustainable brands, if you're over consuming and not wearing those clothes, it's still waste. So are you really participating in sustainable fashion? I don't know. Which leads to my next point about the language you use when we talk about sustainable fashion, which is really why I'm making this video. Lily, also known as Imperfect Idolist, makes awesome sustainable fashion videos. And in her most recent video, I hope it's still her most recent video by the time I upload this, but in her most recent video, she pointed out that putting the words sustainable and whole next to each other is completely contradictory. I had to move quickly. I started filming so late and it's getting so dark. Okay, so even if you're buying sustainable clothes, if you're buying them in large volumes, how sustainable are your decisions? Because the most sustainable thing anyone can do is to reduce their consumption and just use what they have. I have to hold my mic now. Earlier in this video, we spoke about the sustainable fashion movement not looking inclusive simply because mainstream media has equated sustainable fashion to shopping and reformation, when really the best thing we can all do is to use what we already have and consume less. We're under the impression that sustainable living is super expensive, and while it can be, the gag is that the group of people who are consuming the least and using what they have are low-income individuals just by circumstance. Which goes to my next point of how to talk about sustainable fashion. You need to acknowledge that we didn't reinvent the wheel. Hello, so I'm watching this video now and I'm realizing that I kept saying we didn't reinvent the wheel, and that's not what I meant to say. Sustainable living is nothing new. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. I don't know. But yeah. It's that simple. We need to acknowledge that we didn't reinvent the wheel. Because of how urgent the climate crisis is, sustainable living seems more important and more relevant than ever before. There's been lots of emphasis on the importance of consuming plant-based diets, shopping from sustainable brands, practicing minimalism and essentialism. And while all these movements ultimately have positive effects on people and the planet, when we talk about them, it's important to recognize that we didn't reinvent the wheel. It's fair to say that there's a link between cultural appropriation and sustainable living, and before you say I'm reaching, look at this. The definition of cultural appropriation is the unacknowledged or inappropriate adoption of the customs, practices, ideas, etc. of one people or society by members of another and typically more dominant people or society. Did I not spend this whole video talking about how whitewashed sustainability is? Did I not? There's nothing new about eating plants. Literally nothing new about eating plants. There's nothing new about mending your clothes and optimizing the use of the things you already have. There's literally nothing new about repurposing. We didn't reinvent the wheel. So if you're going to talk about sustainable fashion, it's important to recognize that this isn't revolutionary. It's completely necessary. It's nothing new. People have been doing it for decades. So recognize those people who've been doing it for decades, who've been living like this, because it's cultural, because it's spiritual, or because of circumstance. So in this video, although it feels like I covered quite a few points, there are just really two things to remember that will help you to talk about sustainable fashion or sustainable living. One, understand the things that offend people, or the things that people aren't super receptive of when it comes to sustainable fashion, and understand how to address them. And two, recognize the parts of sustainable fashion that need to be part of the conversation more often, so that people truly understand what sustainable fashion is. So the cool part about those 2 points is that they have the exact same solution. We need to be more inclusive in the way we talk about sustainable fashion, and by having these conversations, there are people's questions answered. Every assumption they have about sustainable fashion, everything they don't understand, is being answered just by having more inclusive conversations about sustainability, and that leaves no one on the outside. If you've reached this point, you've watched this video in its entirety, thank you so much for tuning in and sticking around. I know it was a little bit chaotic with me moving. I should probably just stick to filming outside, but every time I'm outside, there's it rains or something bad happens. Thank you for listening to me talk for however long this video was. Like I said, I eat plants. I like my fashion slow. If you like those things or like me, subscribe. You can follow me on Instagram too. You can subscribe to my newsletter, and I will see you with another video. I post twice a week, sometimes more. Bye.